Welcome to Creating Connection with me, your host, Dr. T, where we will navigate being human together. We'll do this through conversations, exploring the challenges and joys of life, uncovering insights and strategies to create meaningful connections, to foster personal growth and find solace in the collective wisdom of our diverse community. Drawing from a unique blend of academic expertise and personal experiences, I will dive into the joys and complexities of aging, death, dying, grief, and body image. With a blend of humor and compassion and understanding, we will forge connections that transcend geographical boundaries and unite us in our shared humanity. When we come together, the possibilities are endless. Creating Connection with me, Dr. T, starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. T, and you're listening to Creating Connection on Transformation Talk Radio. Stay with me for the next hour as I talk with Heather about her journey from perfectionism to empowerment. I love this. So Heather, she is all about helping leaders navigate life transitions to find balance and fulfillment along the way. With a background in mechanical engineering from Penn State University and leadership roles at companies like Dana, GE, Erie Insurance, and Wabtec. Am I saying that right?
Yes.
Okay. She's spent decades honing skills in engineering, manufacturing, and program management. Her passion now lies in empowering others to grow personally and professionally. She's a certified professional coach, believing in the power of understanding and support. And her approach is all about guiding people to make choices that really align with their goals and values, building confidence in their abilities. So whether you're striving for leadership growth or simply seeking resilience in the face of life's up and downs, she is here to help you thrive. Heather, welcome so much to being on my show. So all of that, and I didn't even get to workshops and coaching and all the things that you do. But when we were originally being connected, you have a quote on your website. And I just want to bring this up because it is kind of what, when I saw this, I was like, this is us. And now I'm losing the quote. What is the quote?
I think it's never too late to become who we want to be.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm on your website just scanning really quickly. I'm not good at that in general.
Yeah.
So yes, it's never too late to become who you might have been. That quote, George Eliot, that was on my personal statement when I went to grad school as a 44-year-old adult student, or 43 when I was applying. And then it's just been a guiding force as I've been doing this. What led you to that quote? I mean, if you could just, say like, why did you highlight that quote?
That quote really resonated with me. Most of I've gone through a lot of transitions in my life, let's be honest, but some I didn't realize, it was like they just happened. And so I went with it. But really in midlife, when I started to kind of investigate, like, who do I really want to be? Who am I? Is what I'm doing on the day-to-day in my career and everything, is that my true identity? Or was it something else, that different things in my life led me on the path that I'm on now? And I really should be somewhere else, or want to be somewhere, right? What might I have been?
I'm sure that nobody can relate to that.
I know. And I had this moment in my late 40s where I just said, you know what? If I don't do it now, when am I going to do this? When am I going to go explore what I could be?
Yeah.
And the thought, so my grandfather had his third and fatal heart attack shortly after I graduated from high school. And it was something that always sat with me because it was right after he retired from his career. Remember, his retirement poster that everybody had signed was still sitting in their back porch. Um, it was that recent. And I always said, I want to make sure that I live my life now, not
Mm,
like, well, when I retire, when this, when that, like a lot of us do.
yeah.
And so I said, and the other thing is I don't want to be 80 and look back and say, I wish I would have. I
Yes.
wish I would have. I never wanted that to be a regret.
Yeah.
And that really, again, seeing that quote really resonated with me because that's what led me on this journey that I'm on now.
Mm.
And, what I love to help other people
Well,
navigate as well.
yes, I mean, I love that because, you're saying at a really young age, you kind of saw what people do and how quickly that can end. And that actually,
Mhm.
research bears out that at least it used to, that would happen to men a lot because so much of their identity was wrapped up in who they were as a working person. And I know a couple that, they spent their, whole life, it was like, for retirement plans. And then right as they were retiring, he didn't pass away, but he had a stroke, which altered everything that they were, planning to do. And so, I learned that later. I was like, when I learned about that, I was like, oh, about 20 years ago. And I was like, okay, yeah, I don't want that.
Mhm.
And when I was going to grad school, my husband and I was kind of slogging through a job that I was working at an engineer firm. And he said we were on the way to go see his folks, and he was like, so do you want to spend like 20 years kind of just like miserable, or do you want to take 5 years out? And then focus on what, and it was seven. And then like switch and pivot to something that you really love. And so without that like support and encouragement, I probably would have just given what I was raised with and all of the things, just kind of like that like one foot in front of the other until you die mentality kind of thing, or,
Yeah.
collecting a paycheck. So to be able to create these things later in life is both wonderful and terrifying. But you
Yes.
went from, mechanical engineering, to coaching. And so when you coach, you had mentioned leaders. Are you specifically in any sort of industry, or is it across the board that people find you?
It's across the board. I really look at people that are in those big transitions in their life, and whether it's in their health and wellness, whether it's they're in a career and they want to make a career change, or completely out of their career career
Right.
space, like I did, or even just like personal changes that are going on. I know
Mm.
especially with women in midlife, we've got changes going on and we're trying to juggle everything else. And then all of a sudden our bodies are like, hey, we're going to add one more thing. So it's
Yes.
any of those big transitions that we're going through. Um, like I'd really like to help people navigate that.
Okay, dig in, because it is true. And for myself, I wasn't necessarily thinking like, oh, I'm going to make a change. I just knew I was miserable. And so that's what I love for, having people like you on this show, so that for people listening, it might ring a bell like, oh, hey, I am struggling, or hey, I don't want to have regrets. And there's no guarantee that there's no regrets, but I think being conscious, being aware, being mindful of,
Mm.
what steps you're taking, then it unfolds, and it unfolds as it will, right? And I think that the regret not regret set, is a really interesting concept, because and they have done research that, at the bedside of people who are dying, they are never talking about work. And
Right.
we kind of glibly say that, but there's actually, research that bears that out. And so if someone were, and are you primarily working with women, or do you work with men too, or are you seeing more of a need with
Um,
women?
primarily with women. I mean, yes, I definitely work with men.
Sure,
I'm
sure.
open to work with everyone, but I tend to attract more women. Um,
Well, and I think there's something to that with the midlife and the changes in
mhm,
hormone and, bodies and what's going on. I was recently talking to, we had on our show a woman named Miranda, who's a menopause coach. So she's actually drilled down even to that medical or
mhm.
physical change, that can open up so many doors. But how do you work with people who, do you do group work, or how do you work with people who are in that kind of transition phase,
Yeah, right now,
specifically age wise?
yeah. So right now, really focusing on one-on-one.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that intimate one-on-one connection with others. Maybe sometime in the future, expanding into group, but I'm enjoying that, and I feel like I can serve my clients the best in that.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. And that's what one of the things Miranda had said was that, it's so individual, right? So,
yeah,
you can't, I mean, I was in a room with, I think maybe 20 women and they called it like a fireside chat. Every person, although there was themes and similarities, had a wildly different experience. So when you work one-on-one, how do you begin? Like, how do you say, like, what are we working on?
yeah, yeah. So regardless of what people come to me for, because we all have that things like I need help with XYZ.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have everyone do the ELI assessment. So the ELI assessment is called Energy Leadership Index. And I know that that sounds like, oh, only leaders can take this, but it applies to anyone.
Okay.
And if you've ever taken like a Clifton Strengths or
Mm-hmm.
Myers-Briggs, like those are all personality assessments. And the ELI really looks at where are we putting our energy in our life
Mm.
and what is drawing our energy from it.
Oh.
So, and what that helps uncover, not only for me but especially for the client, is you might want to work on, let's say your relationship. You're like, I really need help in my relationship. Let's go work on this.
Yeah.
That can actually uncover that the your energy, I'll call it like the draw, or I refer to it as your anabolic or your catabolic energy. Anabolic is that building up energy. It's a good, I don't like to say good and bad, but it's that positive energy. It's the things you
Sure.
think about, like what excites you and what gives you energy. And then we have the catabolic energy. That's what like tears us down.
Mm.
And so you may find that you have a lot of catabolic energy around, say, finances. But that's not even something that you're like thinking about working on. You're like, no, I want to work on my relationship.
Okay.
And it can show those links that it's like, you've got some stuff going on over here, and it could be affecting the thing you actually want to work on, which would be, in that case, the relationship. And
Oh,
so taking somebody
fascinating.
through that assessment, uncovering those energy levels in different areas of their life, and then looking at that and saying, do you still want to work on the relationship, or do we want to work on something else? And it's totally up to the client. Like
Sure, of course.
I never influence what they want to work on, but a lot of the times it's super eye-opening to the
Yes.
person. I know it was for me when I first went through the ELI. I'm like, wow, I only spent like 20 minutes taking this assessment. How did it know me so well? Was it like sitting, sitting in the room with me going, I know you better than you think. Um, yeah, so it's a very, very powerful way to look at where we're spending our energy, what we're giving our energy to, what's drawing our energy from us, and how we can start going and addressing those different those
Yeah,
different
well,
areas.
I love a good framework, so I'm immediately like, I need to take this. So that's a side conversation we'll have later. But I think that that's so powerful because, again, where you think that you're focusing on and the surprise of like, oh, really, this is what's draining me. And because it echoes through, right? So if finances are
Mhm.
draining, maybe you're not taking a vacation or going on a date night or something where it's feeling like, oh, maybe it's the relationship that's a problem, but really it's like, oh, actually, these are all coming down from a different segment. And I think, and I've heard so many people that I've talked to, and I'm sure you can, say the same, is that people, especially women mid-age, are saying, no, I'm not wasting my energy. I'm not putting my energy towards that. So there
Mhm.
gets to be this awareness of mortality. I think that is definitely in there. And then there's also I don't want to do that. I really, if it's not filling my cup, time is limited. I'm tired.
Mhm.
But we can continue to have that drain out of different values and expectations of people around us, but to see it, I would imagine, to see it laid clearly, then you could make choices of, where do you put a boundary, or how do you have a tough conversation with somebody because you're seeing that it's an energy sink.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you were hitting on it. It's all about that awareness. That
Hmm.
the ELI assessment helps us be more aware of what's really going on in our life, because we
Yeah.
we all know. We all know it's there. It's
Yeah.
just sometimes we need that, other person saying it to us, or that, as the ELI does, this assessment looking you in the face going, you're like, wow, okay.
Yes.
Like I thought
Yeah.
I was hiding this, but obviously I'm not.
Well, at
So
least
that
I can't
awareness,
hide from it anymore.
yes, yeah. So that awareness is huge, that, allows us to then acknowledge, like, yeah, I need to go do something different over here. Or maybe you don't. Maybe
Yes.
you're like, oh, that's a lot better than I thought it was. And then allowing us to make those choices, like you said, put those boundaries in place, and
Mhm.
reflecting on those boundaries is a great, I think it's a great way to look inside of ourselves and say, I'm setting this boundary, but it's actually creating a lot of, um, uh, ripples in my life because I'm setting it. And so it's like, maybe it's a good boundary for me, but then it's creating other issues. um,
Yes.
yeah. So again, that I like to look at it, the awareness, acknowledging,
Hmm.
what's going on, and then make those choices that really align to where do we want to go.
Yes. I mean, boundary work, and that's a whole separate
Yeah.
podcast episode, because so I'm 54, and as I've learned and tried to understand what is a boundary, I think having a coach or having some support outside of your circle to go, like, is this normal, is this reasonable? Because you know it feels, and I know, like, boundaries come from all different places, but sometimes it feels when I'm trying to establish a boundary that it is life ending. Like, that's how it feels in
Hmm.
my body. Like, it feels
Hmm.
absolutely terrifying. And, the relationship is going to be over. I always go to annihilation because I'm like, well, if I'm not, doing XYZ, then I must not be of value, or, whatever that is. So to have a coach, to say to you, like, yes, this is reasonable, or even hold your hand when it feels scary, because each time it gets easier. And I don't know if you've ever heard Brene Brown say something about the, like, 8 seconds of discomfort in saying no is so much easier than, like, the 6 weeks of resentment when you say yes that you didn't want
Yes.
to say yes to. And, like, for me, I try to think about that, like, when I'm like, okay, like, putting on my adulting and saying, like, okay, yes, I'm going to make a boundary that feels terrifying, but it does then say to you, my life matters, my needs matter. And with this finite time that we have left, where do I really want to be? And I, of course, want to be with people who are wanting to support me, and that we can grow together in that way. So yeah, that it's tricky, especially with family stuff.
Oh yeah.
Any
Yep.
any words of wisdom just briefly on boundaries and families? Or is that too big?
Yeah, that's a great, question. So it can be difficult. It can be so difficult, and I think, yeah, you hit on it, talking about what Brene Brown says, that, there's a little bit of discomfort, but then on the other side of that, it's so much more freeing, um, with families. And this is from my own personal experience. It can feel like you are putting up a big wall, um, and that you're almost shutting people out, even though
Mhm.
that's not what you're doing internally. That's what it can feel like. And
Mhm.
so I think that's where a lot of us, when we're trying to create boundaries within our families, they're like, oh, but there's all the buts and the what
Yes.
ifs come up. Right. And
Yes,
it's
yes,
like, oh,
yes.
no, then what are they going to think? And Um, and so really sitting with ourselves and asking what is right for me
Mm-hmm.
um, is the most important thing.
Yeah, and that can be really hard to see on your own or in your own time, because I know for
Mhm.
myself, there have been moments when I'm like, is this reasonable, or is this, what is this? And then, so through a lot of different work, coming to try and find that middle way. It still gets shaky depending on the situation, but
Mhm.
it's there. So thank you for doing a little toe dip into boundaries, because I think that so many people can relate.
Yeah.
And and that especially when you're talking about self-care, especially when you're talking about transitions, because you're saying, if I'm saying, oh, I want to make a transition, well, that conversation with my husband happened, I mean, over 11 years ago, of the how do we want to work. And I'm, still like, we moved out of state so that I could go to grad school. Like there's a
Mhm.
lot of things which, then had ripple effects to, family and friends, and how do you do things. So I think that when you're talking transition, when you're talking self-care, when you're talking about managing freaking hormones, you
Yeah.
know, boundaries are a real key to kind of the container, to hold that container so that you are able to include yourself in that mix. And so often at this time of life, you might have children at home or just leaving home and caring for older parents. And so you're also like, what does that mean? And now I want something more for my life. How selfish can I be? And so I think the work that you're doing is so important. And and I love this one-on-one approach. I did notice, and I'm just peeking at your website again. So you have a section on longevity and healthy aging, which is
Mm.
my wheelhouse of like, wanting to always better understand and support aging. So what is that for you? Like when you talk about longevity and healthy aging?
Mhm, mhm. So it's really a holistic look at, you know, not just what's going on with our bodies, but how do we want to physically and mentally spend the next several decades of our life. Um, so, I've had my past experiences, but I've also watched so many people in my circle that, in
Mm,
our 40s and 50s and even 60s that essentially have resigned to the fact what they are going through, whether
mm,
it's their health or their mental decline or what, it just is what it is. And I am the total opposite. I'm like, no, 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 no. You have control over that. And
mm,
I know that there's a obviously there's a fine line there. There are some things that we can't control. We have, whether it's a medical condition or um, an illness or disease.
mm,
However, the majority of us, we can control that through just what we're eating,
mhm.
um, the movement that we're getting, and a really big part is the thoughts that are in our head. If we're resigning to the fact that I'm just old
Mm,
and
mhm,
I'm giving up and I can't do these things that I used to enjoy anymore, I
mhm,
just can't walk as far, or I can't, because of whatever it is, I get tired or I get achy. Um, that just is adding fuel to the fire of
mm,
a decline. So, very passionate about teaching people like, how do you at 50, feel good in your body and be excited to get
yes.
up and go do things and know that, at 60 or 70 or even 80, you can still go do the things that you enjoy doing, whether it's
Mhm.
playing golf or maybe you want to travel the world after you retire. But, you're like, gosh, am I even going to be able to like walk around the streets of Greece when I get there?
Yes.
It's,
Yeah, well, I mean, I
um,
think years ago I was in, I pre-grad school, I was in really great physical shape and I went to New York. And I remember
Mhm.
someone in my life was like, "Oh, I've always wanted to go to New York." And I said, "Well, you should start working out now because, just that, the walking that you do, and to your point, if you are exploring overseas or even just being on a plane for that long, not that you can't with different, challenges, of course you can with modifications, but if there's
Mhm.
something within your control, that is, the important piece. But then it's also choice, because I've noticed that with my friends and peer group here, having worked at the Sanford Center for Aging in Reno, Nevada, I was surrounded by very pro-aging, and then I was also teaching undergrad students. So I came back to those conversations, Heather. I came back to, and I was like, what I mean, I was literally like, what is happening, and why are we saying, like, well, it is what it is, and da 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 da. And I'm like, because I always see possibility and potential, and I
Yeah.
also see the reality of being aware and honoring, like, okay, so maybe I have some limitations, or there's some real challenges that come along with aging, but what is still possible? Like, I love
Mhm.
the, instead of like, oh, they're still doing this, I'm like, what's possible? Like, what is,
Yeah.
and even if it has to adjust or change from what you thought, like the couple I had mentioned with, the husband in that case having a stroke, what is possible? Okay, those dreams that you have, not, and there's a grief and there's a pain point of letting those things go, but then there's also the, we're still here, like we're
Yeah.
still here, and that's where the mindset comes in, and what am I able to do? So I'm going to bring this to a personal thing, and we can, maybe it's selfish, but I think people can relate. But when I think about all that I know about aging, all that I know about health and wellness, all that I know about how my body feels when I make certain choices. I was just saying the other day, so I'm gluten-free, and that vacillates because it's an internal thing that I deal with. So sometimes if I'm out to eat or something looks good, I'm like, ah, okay, my joints will be achy. And then more recently, I've been like, my body's asking me to not do these things. Like,
Yeah.
could I just honor her? And so I had inadvertently glutened myself because I
Mm.
had licorice crisp ice cream, and I couldn't. My reaction to my reaction to gluten is that I wake up and I have hot flashes. Otherwise, and so anyone having hot flashes, play around with your glutens, because
Mhm.
and no one wants to hear that, but I only experience hot flashes when I have gluten. So I was like, I have been really like mindful what's happening, and then I looked up licorice. Wah, wah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
I
then and then a friend was like, "Oh no, a life without licorice ice cream," and I was like, yeah, I mean, so, but it's an interesting thing because we do have choices to
Mhm.
support our bodies, to support our health. And then there's grief that, like, oh, I used to, or this was so fun, or, whatever. And, so how do you kind of start making those changes so that you're like, okay, I honor my experience without it being like depriving, or, ugh, like
Mm.
like where life is just pinched and miserable, but I'm going to live a long time because,
Ye Yeah, no, I hear you totally. And just I have to add in here when you said about the licorice, being an engineer, I used to sit at my desk for long hours, and I am gluten intolerant as well. And so it's not like if I have bad reactions to it, but I'm not allergic.
yes.
So I would sit at my desk in the afternoon and eat red licorice, red Twizzlers. And then I'd be like, why do I feel so terrible? I just want to sleep in my head. I got like this dull headache and
I know, but it seems like a low calorie treat, right? Like
it
compared to all the
was.
the pick me ups that you could have. Yeah, licorice seems like, oh yeah, that's a low, point of bringing in.
Yeah.
So how, yeah, so licorice. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yes. You were
So, yeah, so how do yeah, it's separating, and again, it's that acknowledging,
Mm,
how am I going to feel without those things? And I love how you put it's like the grief of losing. It's like
yeah,
losing a part of you. It's like, well,
yeah,
I've always done it this way. And also bringing in what you said earlier about looking at those possibilities. It's like, okay, like if you aren't doing this anymore, you're not eating these particular foods that, you've grown up on and they're like staples. Change is hard for everybody, but think about the new things you get to try and
Mhm.
explore, and that your life isn't, you'll have a better quality of life, right? So you're gonna feel better and enjoy things more, um, even though you can't have that gluten chocolate chip cookie. Like,
Right,
right?
right. And it's but and it seems like I mean, every time I say it, I'm like, well, like it seems like, well, a no-brainer, right? Like I feel
Mhm.
crappy when I do X, and for me, one thing I've noticed, and maybe many people listening, if I have a drink or two, I am awake in the middle of the night. Like it is just now what
Mhm.
happens. And I heard
Mhm.
someone recently say, you can drink or you can sleep. And so that doesn't mean that, maybe sometimes I'll have a drink, but then to be aware of the choice and not beat myself up, so that if I find myself awake at 3 in the morning, say, oh yeah, that was a choice, and
Mhm.
this is the reaction to that choice. But I think we get into this spiral of like judgment and shaming ourselves, and oh, I should be perfect or I should be better. And
Mm.
so when you're talking about making changes so that you feel better, so that you feel optimal, I think we're pushing against ageism, so doctors and things like that, we're pushing against ableism, and we're
Mhm.
pushing against diet culture,
Yeah.
because I've been on every freaking diet, and at this point, am I feeling optimal? No. Am I looking into those for with a lot of different areas? Yes. And I know changes, especially like with inflammatory things that are making me feel crappy anyway, saying goodbye to them. I'm trying, and I don't know if you caught my language, where I'm trying to say, how do I support my body? How am I, she's asking me to not do these things. And if a friend continually asked me, please don't make me feel like crap by doing this one thing, I wouldn't have to be asked more than once.
Yeah.
Heather, I would not have to be asked
Yeah.
more than once. And so we do this to ourselves, of this like, like I want the gluten cookie. I want the
Mhm.
licorice crisp ice cream. I want the gratification of having a few drinks with, because that's just a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
And our bodies are literally saying like, excuse me, no, thank you.
Right. Right. Right.
Like, how? How do we do this?
Yeah. Yeah. For me, and one of the things that I've worked with a lot of clients on is that it's like an intentional pause before you do those
Mm,
things. Right. And I love how you said, it's like you're making that choice.
mhm.
But in the moment, you have to ask yourself, because it's so easy for us to do, it's habit almost. Like I've done this forever. And then
Mhm.
we regret the choice later. We're like, oh, I shouldn't have eaten that, or I shouldn't
Yes.
have had that drink. But taking that pause in the moment and saying, do I really want to feel like that later?
Mhm.
What might
Mhm.
I do differently in this moment so that I can, honor my body, not have that regret later on? And that becomes the new pattern,
Right.
right? Right. Having that moment of, you know, should I eat this cookie because I know I'm going to have a stomach ache later? It's going to taste really good,
Yeah.
but here's how I'm going to feel. Or it's like, no, it sounds good, but I'm choosing not to feel that way later on.
Right.
Um, and that can be challenging. I think it comes back to having that, having somebody hold your hand through some of that,
Mhm.
and to make you more aware of those choices you're making, and acknowledging, was it an intentional choice, or was it more, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Just more habit, or, it was like, oh, yep, I'm going to eat that because it's
Mhm.
going to taste good. I'm going to enjoy the texture on my tongue and the flavor, and it's going to
Mhm.
make me happy right now. but I'm going to be miserable later. And a lot of time we just don't think about that later
Right. And
consequence.
yeah, and I think that that's in the moment. What I've been trying to do is in the later, trying to do that with like the utmost like self-compassion, but like clarity, right? So it's like this is a fact. This is a fact that I'm awake in the middle of the night. This is a fact that my joints hurt. But can I do that without really like beating up myself and saying like, oh, because I think that then that goes to that other fear or sphere. So you start beating up on yourself and then it causes that cycle, right? Where you're like,
Mhm.
I don't even want to acknowledge this. But I think that acknowledging with compassion and understanding then allows you to, at that next moment, it's not a deprivation, but it is a true choice out of care and love. So I
Yeah.
think that there's a switch there that is something that I'm trying to work towards because
Mhm.
like I said, I've been on so many diets. I don't want another diet, but I know that carrying excess weight as I am right now isn't optimal. It just doesn't feel good in
Sure.
my body. And so it's like also saying that out loud without being like, ashamed or something like that. It's like, no, this is a fact. I can look at my
Right.
body over the years and say like, okay, when did I feel optimal and what was I doing at that time? Okay. And yes, my body has changed, so it might need different tweaks as we age and as we have these hormone things, which is, something else to look into. But I
Right.
do think that what you're saying about the intentional pause and the awareness it's like then it creates choice and then it creates openness versus that kind of closed down like these are the calories I can eat and only these calories because
Mhm.
we're going to fight against that. I mean, anyone who's ever been on a diet knows that it
Yeah.
gets to a point where it's like enough because you can't maintain that rigidity, but you're saying choice, so pause, see the choice and see the options, and so maybe that option becomes more pleasurable because you're like, oh my gosh, I've slept through the night for 8 nights. I have energy or I have clarity in my mind. Oh, this feels really good,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
if it's taking anyone out there many times to do this as it has for me, I mean, it'll eventually, because the cognitive dissonance of like what am I saying I want versus
Right.
what am I doing and what's the results, like it starts getting pretty painful.
Yeah, yeah, it does. It does. I told my husband when we first started dating, and he's like, "I need you in my life. You're a health coach." And but I said to him one day, I said, most people don't realize what it is to feel good until they start feeling good, or vice versa, right? They
Yes.
don't know. They're like, "I'm fine. Like
Yeah.
I don't feel bad." And
Yeah.
then they start making some changes and they're like, oh, to your point, you're like, oh, I slept better and I have more energy. You're like,
Yes.
I didn't even know this was a possibility. Like,
Yes.
wow. And those types of things really obviously help reinforce those, yeah, going back to what you just said, making that intentional choice to go,
Hmm.
okay, I've been feeling really good for, a week.
Yeah.
Do I
Yes.
want to keep this up or do I want to go back to the way I was feeling before?
Yes. And sometimes it does take the like going back and going, I mean, it is not a clear because you are fighting against, as you had said, habits. Now we can circle on back to boundaries of like what you
Mhm.
do with certain people, and then saying, or like certain foods that people want to share with you, and you're like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't. I'm sorry, I can't. And then that, to me, as a actively recovering people pleaser, that gets in the way too, right? Because I'm like, oh, they went through all this effort. I don't want to tell them that
Yeah.
that is gluten. So I will just, but really, I think making that conscious choice of like, okay, and it would be, I mean, I have a dear friend who she'll go places and she'll bring her own food. And it's like a
Mhm.
no, it's like this neutral thing. And I want to grow up and be like her because I would love to just be like, oh yeah, I'm not gonna, oh yes, you did spend a lot of work on this. How would you even say, I'm sorry, I don't eat that? Like, do you have a phrase that a go-to phrase?
I just say I don't. What's coming to mind is there was a so I used to help with the interns every summer at GE, and so HR would always do a pizza party at the end of summer. And so I remember the one HR manager, I walked in and there's pizza all over the place. And she's like, grab some pizza. I said, oh, I can't eat pizza. She's like, you don't eat pizza? So
Yes.
I get there's almost a stigma. Like,
Mhm.
doesn't everybody eat pizza? Like there's
Yes.
vegetarian, and I'm like, no, I can't eat the pizza. Like,
Yes.
I don't want to eat it. I can eat it. Although I always tell people, I say, no, no, thank you. I don't want, or I can't eat that. I'm like, actually, I can eat it, but then I need to go home. And
Oh.
that's usually like, they're like, oh, okay. I'm like, yeah, it doesn't sit well with my digestive system. And that sometimes, puts other people at ease, instead of
Yes.
being the reaction that the HR manager, like, oh my God, like you can't, because I think
Well,
she felt bad.
yes, yes. Well, and so many people do that, and then they start like the negotiating, like, well, can you have this? Can you have this? And it's like, just across the board. It just
Yeah.
is not so, and so it is almost, especially when it is like, well, technically I can, so I get like that caught up in my head too, but I like
Yeah.
that. But then and if I did that add-on, if I said technically I can, but then I end up in a lot of pain and having some symptoms,
Mhm.
I know that the people in my life care and love for me enough that they'd be like, oh, okay. And then it is also difficult when it's like something I truly do want to have, like I'm thinking of my friend's husband who cooks these amazing meals. And just by the fact of what he's cooking, it has gluten in. And oh, I love those meals, Heather. Like I love those meals. And last winter, because it's usually a winter thing, a winter gathering. And I was just like, F it, which
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
then the F it, it impacts me. So at some point, then it
Sure.
comes back to that boundary. And what am I choosing for myself so that I can have, this aging versus fighting myself trying to hold on to that,
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference when we first started talking about like what's possible and the people in our lives who are like, well, this is the way it is. So when someone is eating a certain way, or if they are having certain reactions, achy joints, it's like, well, I'm old, and then they
Mhm.
just dismiss it. And I'm like, well, no, I'm telling you that maybe, and I can't guarantee for you, try this one thing and see what happens. No one, no, no. So if you're dismissing it with like ageist notions, or if you're a doctor, I had a doctor say to me, this was, many years ago. But I was in my 40s and I had started working out at a weightlifting gym. So I had a trainer and, and I was, and my knee was acting up. And this doctor actually said to me, "Mm, in your 40s, you really should not be doing squats." And I'm like, it is and I'm from my trainer. I know it's your largest muscle group and it's how you burn and it's how you maintain your energy. And I thought, well, I'm glad that I am who I am, that I'm like, okay, thanks for your input, but I'm gonna go do
Mhm.
squats and I'll modify it on my own versus, well, actually I think I ended up going to an athletic PT. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But I know so many people who would have looked at that authority figure as a physician and then just went, check, I don't have to do squats anymore because my doctor said, or, my doctor said I shouldn't do this. And then all of a sudden it's that self-fulfilling prophecy. And you're really just building that, that kind of cage based on like, it is the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great example too, because I mean, studies show that we can continue to build muscle as we get older. And it's so important
Yes.
because, especially we as women, we're naturally losing our muscle. So, if
Yes.
there's anything that we should be doing, it's strength training.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. But gosh, what a great example of like the things that we are constantly bombarded with in
Hmm.
society and in our culture, that it's like it makes it confusing. What should I
Yeah.
be doing? Right? So we're
Yes.
trying to do the best thing for us and make ourselves feel better. And it's like, trying to go through everything and pick the right thing to do. And that can be challenging.
Yes, absolutely. So if you, I mean, like out of your whole toolbox, if you were picking one thing, like one action item that people could do after they're done listening to this, what one thing would you say? Okay, start here.
Mm, gosh, I think the one thing that no matter where you are, whether you're trying to make a decision in life, it's the health and wellness piece, your career, be aware of where you are right now.
Mm,
Um, I find that can be the most challenging thing for us to do. But if we're not doing that, not being aware, and then the next step would be that acknowledgement, that we are there, we're not going to get very far going forward
yeah.
because we're not dealing with the now and the present.
Hmm.
So doing that inner work, and that, what am I experiencing? What am I feeling? What thoughts come up for me on a regular basis when I'm thinking about making these
Hmm.
changes or transitions and
Yeah,
dealing with
absolutely.
those.
Absolutely. Because what's coming to mind as you're saying that is that, the mindfulness aspect that I always come back to is that, if you're thinking about the future, that's not in the present. You're thinking about the future can often, bring anxiety or fear, or, I know people who, they lost people at early ages, and then they get to that age and they're like, well, I guess this will happen to me too. And so there's a lot of fear looking forward. Or,
Mhm.
as you had said, I used to be able to do this. And so then there's that, looking back and going like, it's still not in the present. So in the present moment, becoming aware again, and I want to just emphasize like compassion and non-judgment, because I
Mhm.
also know that I could say, and I have said horrible things to myself about my body at other times when I have carried excess weight. And so, like to have a compassionate inventory. And I think
Yeah,
that's when it helps to talk to a coach, when it helps to like bounce that off someone, because it is an act of retraining your brain to say like, okay, I acknowledge this is where I am, without going like, well, where's the quick fix, where's the, like, oh, if I wouldn't have blah blah blah, if I wouldn't have, what did I do, oh over COVID, I discovered Popeye's chicken sandwiches. I hadn't eaten fast food in years. Like, I mean, because it was gluten, it was fried, it was, and with all of the things happening with my dissertation, peri-menopause, like all of
Mhm.
the things, I can look at that point and go like, oh, I wish I wouldn't have eaten so many of those. But I can't change that.
No.
I can only say like, well, that was a moment in time. Like, and,
Yeah.
and God love you, if you can enjoy those because they're really good. Anyways, I'm kind of digressing, but I think that I want that to be also part of, that practice of inventorying what's here in the present moment. Okay, my body doesn't feel good. Do I know that it's age, right?
Yeah.
Do you know Ashton Applewhite's work?
I do not.
She
No.
has a book called This Chair Rocks, and then she has um, a website where it's like, Yo, is this ageist? And so, people will send things in and she'll talk about, is it ageist or not? But she has a TED Talk. And in that TED Talk, she says something about, her knee was hurting. And she was like, age, whatever age she was at the time. And then she thought, well, my other knee doesn't hurt and it's the same age. So I think that's, in the
Yeah.
present, like what is, we can't, if we just blanket say like, oh, it's age, we're
Mhm.
going to do a lot of self-imposed limits and not want to change or add things in. But if it's like, okay, this one thing is making a difference. And so I think it's that baby step, right? To awareness and then choice and then
Absolutely.
intentional. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you kind of uncovered a little bit more. It's that knowing knowing where we are. I picture it almost like as a set of steps. Like if we don't we can't identify the foundation, like where we're standing today, then how do
Mhm.
we know what that next step is? Right. And as you said, like you can see into the future, you're like looking at the top of the stairs going, I want to get up there. It's like, but you need to focus on where you are right now
Yes.
to even know what that first step is that you need to take.
Yes. Without buying into this is just the step I'm on and I'll never get to do that.
Yes.
And,
Right.
because maybe you would need assistance getting up the steps, or maybe it would be the tweaks and changes that you can make.
Mhm.
Or, maybe the reality is you can't go up steps anymore. And then what do you
Yeah.
do on this floor to make your life, as rich as possible? Because,
Right.
there's many things, and you had said this as we started, like there's many things that we can't control. And so, that awareness of, where do you want to be? Where are you right now? Can I see this clearly without judgment and with some
Mhm.
compassion, maybe even humor? I'm always like, can I laugh a little bit about my Popeye's chicken sandwiches? Yes, I can.
Yeah.
So, but like then you can actually say, like I just said to my friend about the licorice ice cream, my body's been asking me for some time. I think it's time to listen. And so, how can you have that relationship with your body and your experience like you would a friend, and like
Mhm.
and making choices for that. Um,
Yeah. I
in
love
the
that.
time that we have left, is there anything that I didn't ask that like you're like, oh, I want people to know this, or this is where they can find me, or any of the things about Heather?
Yeah. Gosh. They can find me online at Heather, or if they look up Heather Orengia, or my website is orengiasolutions.com. Um, I'm super passionate about so many things, health and wellness and life transitions, just helping us live healthier and happier lives overall. And gosh, this was great today. I think you and I could talk for hours.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah, yeah.
So in that, I did notice you have a values worksheet on your website. So if people
Yes.
go to your website, they can do a downloadable kind of check-in, maybe, and talk to me about what that leads them to, or why is it important to have values on their awareness?
Values, yeah, doing your values assessment. And it really ties into a lot of the things that we talked about today. We're influenced by so many things in our lives. The things we feel we should do, the past that we've been set on because of things that happen. And I always ask people, have you ever sat down and really thought about what are your values? What do you value
Mm,
in life? Not what values have you brought from maybe your family of origin
yes.
or your career, but what do you value? And I'm shocked at the number of people. I'm not really shocked because I was the same way. The number of people that are like, well, I value this. And then when they really think about it, they're like, I don't really value that. Like, that came from my childhood, that came from my job.
Mm,
So, as a starting point, just really looking at what are the things I value, and it's kind of that foundational step to start looking at, do the things that I'm doing in life or these changes that I want to make, do they
mhm.
align to my values? Because if they don't, you're probably not going to stick to those changes, or you're
Yes.
going to get on the other side and be like, what am I doing here?
Yes.
It
Yes.
doesn't align with with your values.
Yes, yes, because you're not going to stick with things if it doesn't align with your values. So if it's a diet that's just smacked on you and you're like, oh, I want, to lose whatever for whatever reason, and it's not aligned with your values, you won't be able to stick with it for long. And that's why, all of I'm pointing at my bookshelf, but like so much of the research says, this treadmill of like, being wanting your body to be different, and
Mhm.
then doing really extreme things, you gain, weight back, versus saying like, okay, is this my frame, and am I comfortable, am I able to do the things that I want to do? And we have all different shapes and sizes of bodies. Like we
Yeah.
never ever look in nature and go like, that maple should maple tree should be like the evergreen tree. And, but we do that as people, right? We hold
Yeah.
up
Oh
these
yeah.
images and ideas of like, this should be this. So, which is a whole nother topic. And see,
Yeah.
we're at just a couple of minutes and I'm like, oh my gosh, well, we'll
Yeah.
have to have you back because I think there's so much value in talking about all of these things because they weave together.
Yeah.
Aging, transitions, boundaries, food, then that goes to boundaries, and
Yes.
family and
Yes.
all of those things. So,
Yeah.
we've kind of tops of the trees looked at this, but I like this idea of inviting people to go look at their, go to your website and that'll be listed. It's also will be listed in the description, but go to your website, do a values assessment and just start thinking about where am I putting my time and then starting to think about you know, where do I feel filled up and where do I feel depleted? And it might
Mhm.
not be in the areas that you think. And above all, get a trusted coach so that you can, start bumping up against these things in a safe way and with
Yes.
some guidance.
Yeah, definitely.
I just really appreciate you. And to all those who are listening, I just want to say thank you so much for tuning into Creating Connection with Dr. T. I'm grateful that you chose to spend this time with us today, and please do reach out with any questions or comments or show ideas. Thank you so much for sharing my show, and please join me on the first and third Wednesdays of every month at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Central, and 10 a.m. Pacific. And until then, take good care of yourself and others, and I'll see you back here in August with another special guest who will be talking about inflammation. So stay tuned, and thank you again, Heather. I appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you. It was wonderful being a guest.
Yay. Thank you for listening to Creating Connection with me, Dr. T. You can join me by tuning in on the first and third Wednesdays every month at 10 a.m. Pacific on transformationtalkradio.com, where we will navigate being human together. Being human means that we all have a body, and we will all experience loss, grief, and aging if we're lucky. Let's join together on this journey of exploration, support, and mutual learning. I love bringing people together, and on Creating Connection, we are a conversation away from understanding another person and, quite frankly, ourselves. For more information, visit ccwithdrt.com.